Ms. Urie, thank you for coming tonight. I think you know the drill. If you'll give the city clerk your name, you'll have 5 minutes.
Steve Urie from Joplin, Missouri. There are so many ways to state the issue here, but let's keep it simple. I'm against discrimination of any kind, based on race, gender, heritage, generational. It is just something that it's time to deal with. On June 10th, 2020, Toby Teeter's statement on the continued violent mistreatment of the Black community was published in the Joplin Globe. The severe backlash and continued treatment of Mr. Teeter has been merciless and stood to create harm for our city. Not because what he said was wrong, but it stood to point out that the continued violence and discrimination is true. This really isn't about Mr. Teeter. This is about the very fabric that makes Joplin who it is. There's a stain that needs to be dealt with, and it is not with baby steps, but with direct action. It is a sad note to admit that I came from a home deeply steeped in racism and hatred. For me, it had an opposite effect, as I was deeply aware that this did not match my love of God's grace and how we should treat one another. I grew up in Joplin, a white male, and some say I cannot understand or be an ally to the people of color I deeply respect and love. God's grace is an amazing thing, but we have seen meeting after meeting that used to manipulate, control, and create more hate. So I'm here telling my story, one that is not dissimilar to many others. And Mr. Shaw, you are a part of that story, and you may not remember. In the 1960s, I had a classmate, a person of color, that had a beer can opener twisted into his back. And while those of us that were appalled by it, we were told, it's okay, he's Black. I worked with a person of color at a local hospital. We got off work at 11 p.m. I would take her home, or as far to her home as I could go. Her brother would meet us at Broadway. Because you see, in the 60s, they were not supposed to be out of Easttown after dark. And I could not drive in to Easttown after dark. I was followed home one night, and while walking into the house, a group of men started egging my car and calling me an in lover. When my dad realized what was happening, he stood with the men that had egged my car. Still, my faith allowed me to persevere, and I continued with God's grace to stand up against this type of behavior of hate. I will move to the 90s, when in 97, while putting up our church sign, a group of men drove by yelling, "Faggots are going to hell." And as they yelled, they saw that one of our people was Black, and they yelled, "We'll come back and get him later." Oftentimes, our church members would go to Jim Bob's after church. "Mr. Shaw, you came up to our table because we had said grace. And you said, I don't see that often in Joplin. Who are you?" And one of my deacons said, "We're MCC, and we have an outreach to the gay community." Your response was, "Oh, that's too bad." I've had death threats over the years because of being gay and being a pastor. After losing everything in the 2011 tornado, I went home to find one of the closed closet doors propped against my home with the words, "Faggots lived here. This is God's punishment." When I walk in places with friends of color, I am still called an end lover. As recently as the last campaign, I volunteered with another candidate, was at a local eatery showing my Facebook page to people and saying, you don't want somebody on the council who has a glamour shot of him and his boyfriend on Facebook. That was actually a picture out of my church directory. Yes, it's not always out in your face, but it is around every corner. You can come out on the right side of history by ignoring the hate and confirming the positive effects, the progressive work of Mr. Teeter and the chamber for doing what they're doing. I would respectfully like to request another minute.
Mayor, I'd make a motion that Mr. Urie be received another 1 minute.
We got a motion from Mr. Cortez, a second from Mr. Koppel to grant Mr. Urie a minute. Please vote. That motion passes, 9 in favor. Please proceed.
Thank you, Council. But it doesn't stop there. What has the Council done to address this issue within our city government? Its departments. Have you directed or has the city administration addressed issues of discrimination within the city of Joplin, its departments, and in the community? Has there been clear and concise dialogue up to and including sensitivity training on discrimination toward people of color, the gay community, people of other ethnic as well as faith backgrounds? Are there policies in place now showing the work has been done other than a non-discrimination statement? I strongly encourage this council to establish, develop, and implement a board or committee made up of members of the minority groups in this city with the authority to investigate what is being done, meet with department heads, hear community issues, both from inside and outside of city government without fear of reprisal, and bring recommendations to this body for action. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Urie.